Adrian, born in Rosario, Argentina, is going to tell us about many different aspects, how his practice connects to the countryside. He is the recipient of many awards, the Sharjah Biennial Award, the Zurich Art Prize at the Museum Haus Konstruktiv, which brought him for the first time actually to do a museum show in Switzerland, as well as the Benesse Prize, and of course has done hundreds of exhibitions, most recently an exhibition on the roof of the Metropolitan Museum in New York City. We've known each other for more than 10 years, and it's been and it is an amazing adventure for which I'm so grateful to Adrian. Adrian actually did the inaugural show in our Zaha Hadid second Serpentine building in London, and I always felt that the practice has so many different dimensions. It's sculpture, it's installation, it's architecture, it's drawing, it's also poetry, it's music, it's also politics, urbanism. But what very few people know is actually that Adrian has a farm in Rosario, and he always returns to this farm in Rosario, so the countryside is always present. Please give a very, very warm welcome to Adrian Villarojas.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for this wonderful introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me to be here with you. I wrote I think too much text, too many images. I will do my best to go as fast as possible and not be super boring. Basically, I think, and I think we are all, I mean, so far from what I'm being hearing, it's an incredible, difficult thing to speak about the countryside. And it's incredibly more difficult to talk about nature. I find this they're incredibly beautiful equations, but they're incredibly problematic, and because of course, this quality of equations. So I will try to address different angles of these problems. The concept of countryside is for me something really hard to hold in mind as a way to express a territorial space ruled more by nature than by human beings. For instance, in Rosario, Argentina, countryside could perfectly mean agrotoxic-based hyperproduction of 70 million tons of soya per year. Most of it's exported to China. Just to give some numbers that could express this equation, from Earth's land mammals, 30% are human. 67% is represented by livestock and pets, and a very small 3% are wild animals. 90% of photosynthesis on Earth occurs in anthropogenic environments, let's say environments modified by human beings. Basically, I'm gonna start with this project I did in 2008. It's going to be moving and I will be talking. Basically, I divided my presentation in three groups. And the first group relates to what I call the clay-cement equation. When I had, during my first years in university, I had a fantasy, the intuition that what I was taught to produce, the so-called contemporary art, should not last forever. That should have this ephemeral quality. This was a very early and intuitive concern, a very, let's say, a very reduced concept that I would later on engage and try to develop, hopefully. This is what I'm fighting to do now. Most of the projects, or if not basically all of the projects you will see, do not exist anymore. I will go back to some of these images. So this thing, which it's kind of something similar to a whale, was done with a clay recovered from the pits of the city. This city is called Ushuaia in Argentina. So this is the map where you can see where the city is located. This is the southern, usually Ushuaia is regarded as the southernmost city in the world, and you can perfectly see in this image. So my practice involves, basically what I try to do for this project is take a series of things I've been doing in the last more or less 10 years. It's not the whole thing I would call what I do, but it's a part of it. And these things, I like to use this word things. I don't like much the word sculptures. But anyways, they, as I said, disappeared and are slowly reintegrated into the landscape. So basically, one thing I learned is like the disappearance of this sculptural product makes the interface evident. What is behind this interface is the human hand, the action of the human being on Earth. In the same way that the clay plus cement equation, because these things are made out of clay and cement, states before the human beings and after the human beings. Let's say clay very clearly, I will go back to this one. It's running crazy, you can watch at the pictures and then I will come back and hopefully this will make sense. So most of these things I've been doing are done with a mixture of clay and cement. And to put it in a very reduced way, clay is all life, previous life to human beings that have been sitting on Earth, and been transversing life on Earth. And now, of course, are not live anymore, and they have been decomposed and are part of our soil. And cement is basically what very clearly stages our intervention on this planet, to put it in a very, factical way. So, what you will see, mainly, this is another project I did in 2009 as well. So the whale was 2009, and that was Argentina, and this other one was in Ecuador, in Cuenca, in an archaeological site. Let me check again, because this was so many years ago, where I'm not that young anymore. So this was done in a Pumapungo Park in Cuenca, Ecuador. And this is an archaeological park located in the historic center of the city of Cuenca. This was built at the end of the 15th century, and it holds, among many other features, the Temple of the Sun and the Convent of the Virgins of the Sun. So these were part of the ancient Inca Empire. Usually, and perhaps if someone has heard me before talking about my projects, I never mentioned that much about the context. But I felt this occasion was, calling for it. So what you're seeing is a team of people, all that work with me. So we move, I call it a nomadic studio. There's no studio practice, it's totally delocalized. And we've been moving from one place to the other, working, let's say, from 2008. I've been moving them, unfortunately for them, for the last more or less 10 years. This project was called the Most Beautiful Moment of War. How do I pronounce it in Spanish it's el momento más hermoso de la guerra, no sabe distinguir el amor de cualquier sentimiento. It's the most beautiful moment of war, cannot distinguish love from any other feeling. So now we are going to this other project that happened in Argentina, in a province called San Juan, in a city called San Juan, and this place is called the Valley of the Moon. So this is again the team that travels with me, and this is like a sibling of the whale down in this city I was mentioning called Ushuaia. One very interesting thing happened, and I think it's perhaps the best compliment what I do has ever received. Is that we did this one in 2010, and I think a couple months ago, some drone was flying around this site, and of course saw this, photographed this thing. And when they photograph it, since it's not labeled, none of these projects are labeled. They are never labeled with artist X or title X. So when we are moving against Paris. When this project was found, it was thought that this was a fossil of some lost whale or mammal or dinosaur or thing. This is incredibly important because this person here saying something like, I don't like the word art. What I learned also while doing this thing is that the interface is a human hand. What remains is these human beings that have been building these things. Therefore, this context that holds them, it could be art, but it could be some other too. I'm not particularly interested in this. So I've been mining how people interface with my work, and the most let's say critical observation and perfect statement of this situation is that this thing lost its agency as art. It was addressed as a fossil. So I'm quite proud of what happened to this one. This project, we are going to go very fast. This is Paris, the Tuileries Garden, very close to the Louvre. Basically, what I like about this one is that this is 2011, is how somehow there's another problem with the agency of things, right? People thought we were a part of some municipality, I don't know, like working agency, and well, we were installing in the middle of a very touristic, populated space. Just wanted to, I think this also talks, I mean, in my opinion, quite nicely about this, like going from these artificial concepts that we have between urban, countryside, rural, man-made or natural, right? So we're installing this thing, which is kind of a very abstract pipe. So you can see us. And this is the end result. It was clean in the end. Anyways. So now we are getting to this farm that Hans Ulrich was mentioning, called the brick farm. This project was done in my city. And how are we doing with time? What time is it? How much time I have? 5 minutes? Whew. I will never make it. So I will tell you a little bit about this city. The city of Rosario is located south of the Santa Fe province, 300 kilometers north of Buenos Aires in what is called the humid Pampas, an extensive plain uniquely apt for intensive agriculture activity on the west bank of the Paraná River. The Paraná-Paraguay waterway is a link between three neighboring countries, Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil. With more than 1,300,000 people in its metropolitan area, Rosario is the... I'm going too fast? Sorry. Okay, I relax. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that this city is a very important city for agricultural means. Again, the most of this soya production I was discussing a couple minutes ago is exported to China, and it's produced in my city. I found this brick farm. It's a brick works, and I wanted to mention a little thing about. I mean, what I find very problematic about what we've been discussing in terms of the countryside is that I think we so far haven't mentioned something, which is capital produced these ideas we are having. So I think when we talk about the Anthropocene, which is it's a very interesting concept, but it's kind of boring, right? Like, I mean, this guy doing these whales, I mean, end of the world, and he's going to mention Anthropocene. It's like the most cheesy, corny place to be. But I was like reading about it one more time, and I think it's important to, let's say, decolonize this concept of the Anthropocene. And there's these theoreticians that have been working on these concepts. And to go back to the concept of the countryside, I come from a country which is entirely, in terms of its geopolitical position, a countryside, right? So I'm going to try to read in a very slow manner. So from a geopolitical and world system perspective, Argentina, since its constitution as a republic independent from the Spanish royal crown, we were discovered by the Spaniards, has been positioned by the economic colonial and neo-colonial structures in a countryside region. Once Latin America was run out of gold and silver, it was chosen and designed as the countryside of the planet, whose structural function would be, and continues until today, to provide food, minerals, and oil to first world economies. So when in this beautiful interview I had to do, they asked me about my memories in the countryside. It was a very dividing moment because I live in a whole continent that still works and functions for the rest of the world as a countryside, because our mainly task is to produce primary materials, right? So this is, I think, a new layer of discussions, perhaps, when we refer to the countryside, right? Like, I mean, yeah, countryside can be supposedly some beautiful cows in some green pastures, but also countryside can be perfectly whole cities, only massively producing, again, primary materials. And then what we receive is basically manufactured goods from these other, like, big economies. So this takes us to, I will go totally fast forward. This takes us to something I found quite interesting, which is how these exchanges are done. And when, I mean, I found it interesting because I think it brings to my eyes a new aspect of Anthropocene. Anthropocene has been turned into, okay, we human beings did wrong. Steam machines, steam machines, coal came, and capital came, and we transformed from we moved from a rural world to a urban world or industrial world. So, as I'm going to quote Frederick Jameson. So, as Frederick Jameson put it, it is easier to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. This is because capitalism has become coextensive with the earth. The dynamic of capital accumulation gave rise to a second nature made up of roads, plantations, railways, mines, pipelines, wells. It is the profit-oriented technostructure that swung the Earth system into the Anthropocene. And this is also a very interesting quote to add to, again, my opinion. I don't know if you will find it interesting, hopefully. These new theories are proposing to not call the Anthropocene the age of men, but actually the age of capital. And we are quoting another brilliant mind called Eric Hobsbawm here, right? He calls the age of capital the time from 1848 to 1875. So there's this, in this flux of thinking, we keep on looking at the brick farm, awesome. There's these British geographers called Simon Lewis and Mark Maslin. They have recently proposed starting the Anthropocene. I don't know how much, I mean, I guess you hear all the time about this, but they are trying to find the date when Anthropocene started. Is it agriculture? Is it the steam machine creation? So these persons are coming with this proposal. And this hasn't been defined, and it will be very soon defined. So it's a quite interesting moment, because whenever we put this pinpoint in whichever series of timelines we are living in, it will create way more concepts around it, right? So these Simon Lewis and Mark Maslin, they have recently proposed starting the Anthropocene with the European conquer of America. This major historical event, so fateful for the Amerindian people and foundational for a capitalist world economy, did indeed left its marks on our planet's geology. The unification of the flora and the fauna of the old and new worlds caused an upheaval in agricultural, botanical, and zoological map of the world, newly mingling in a biological globalization form of life separated 200 million years earlier in the breakup of Pangaea and the opening of the Atlantic Ocean. So because of the trade, all of a sudden human beings reconnected the species, flora and fauna that were separated for all these millions of years. So I don't know if I have much more time, 3 minutes, okay. So I will fast forward a little bit more. So these are experiments based on, let's say, this capacity I believe I have and we have with my team of collaborators, which is to socialize. So every time we go to a project, many times to make the whale or things, other sculptural interventions, we also reconnect or connect with people around us that live in the sites we occupy. So most of these projects, like the brick farm or these experiments in Xochimilco, or experiments I've been doing in Korea, in South Korea, in the borderline between North Korea and South Korea, are oriented to this type of negotiation, communication, and exchange. So I will move very fast now. This is a project I'm currently working on in a little village called Yangjiri. This is the buffer zone around the DMZ, the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. So this is a byproduct of a Second World War and Cold War between the US and Russia, right? In a way, again. So I'm going to just trying to move as fast as possible in the last pictures we have. And I want to get to the last bits that I wanted to share with you, which is something totally else. I guess I prepared this talk for like 1 hour, right? Had the fantasy of coming and talking to you guys for like ever. So this gets me to a comic book. So this comic book was published in 1969, and it's called El Eternauta. It's done by Héctor Germán Oesterheld, disappeared in the last dictatorship in Argentina, and Alberto Breccia. Alberto Breccia is regarded as one of the masters of comic book art. This comic, and just to finalize these ideas around capital and Anthropocene, an exchange between, let's say, the third world economies and first world economies. In this comic book, aliens come to invade planet Earth. And aliens negotiate that they will only invade Southern America, and they negotiate this contract with the global economy, the most powerful economies. So this comic book, published during the last dictatorship we had in Argentina, addresses somehow some of these topics I was trying to very clumsily express. This was, of course, it was cancelled very soon, as they understood what was this very strong message these authors were trying to deliver. But you can imagine, like, I mean, the most incredible use of imagery plus the most strong political content in a very massive publication in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, happening in 1969. It's like, I don't know, I can only marvel at what I would say. It's like, I mean, very humbling. I'm doing nothing compared to these things, right? Well, anyways, thank you so much for your time.
Adrian, thank you so much for this great presentation. And of course, there are so many questions. One thing I thought would be interesting to address, and it's something which came to my mind also this morning, you know, listening to Philip's talk, learning from Smithson. I was kind of thinking, when Philip mentioned, you know, that it's not about the binary nature culture, that the human and the non-human are intertwined. The second thing, the terrain vague, and the third thing, this idea of expeditions, and very often also groups. You very often work, you know, with group expedition. It seems to be that all these three elements are kind of so present in your work. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about the connection to Smithson, to entropy, also with your big, you know, your big installation.
Yeah, this is going to sound very stupid, but Robert Smithson, of course now I'm very well aware of his work, was never a reference. I learned about his practice very much, like perhaps a couple of years ago, although of course I can recognize the connections between what I do and land art. As perhaps I tried to express, I'm very interested in this, let's say, because of not having, mostly there's no work after a couple months after finishing whatever object or thing, environment, installation I have finished. It always goes back to the interface, which is these humans that work with me and myself. It's always going back to this, and this has driven me to use this metaphor of the theater. I mean, the theater is this art that cannot be properly recorded. Honestly, I mean, there's no proper... I mean, if you film a theater play, you turn it into something else. If you write the script, there's no way to describe perhaps every and each one of the movements that actors do. And actually, the only way to record a theater play is throughout its actors. And once, let's say if you're a theater playwright, once your actors leave you or they are not able to perform this whatever play you are working with them, you lose the play, right? You lose your work. So I don't know if that answers
No,
the
it
part,
answers
but
perfectly, and also it leads to another question, which is of course, theater, but there is also film. And one thing which we haven't actually so far heard about is your practice as a filmmaker, because we worked together on a film for the Lina Bobardi House, and we invited artists to inhabit and literally live in the Lina Bobardi House. But there's particularly one film called The Lost Spider, which actually premiered, I think, in Marrakesh, which has a lot to do with the theme here, with the countryside, because you went to Moroccan villages, you worked with local craftsmen and craftswomen, you worked with potters, with bricks. Can you tell us a little bit about filmmaking and that specific film in general?
Yeah, I think perhaps what happened with filmmaking is that it occurred as a collateral or byproduct of other projects I was doing back then. I have like this tendency to hyper-production. So, as you can see, it's like very difficult for me to find limits. I'm sorry. So the example in Marrakesh was I was invited to a biennial. I was doing, but also I was doing research for my own purposes. I was doing research on materials that I knew I could find there, and some I was not aware, but I happened to find. I do believe in serendipity, so I do like to immerse myself in places I'm invited to spend time in. I do believe in this time spent. It's very normal that an artist comes to, a city invited by an institution, be it a biennial, a museum, whatsoever, and you spend maybe 48 hours in a place. And I don't think that's an equal exchange, because then we can go into problems like also generating some sort of like colonization of different places, right? Using a site as a landscape for your project, and that's it. So I really try to spend as much time as I can humanly do in different places I'm invited. And in Morocco, we spent firstly a month doing research, and then 3 weeks doing this film work. But what I was trying to say about the film production is that I consider it a byproduct of what would be some other main branches of my practice. And the film in Marrakesh, which is oriented towards small communities, mainly using, pottery making villages, happened as an accident. This film happened as an accident of me doing research for some other projects or ideas I was trying to experiment. The same, and to mention one other project related to these like activities, when I was invited to the Shanghai Biennial in 2012, I was invited to do some sort of big sculpture lab, and I found it quite impossible to produce something. I was spending there a month, and they were renovating what now is a power plant of ideas or something like this very big museum, which was a big power plant in Shanghai. And I never finished the project, but I started to film the renovation, this super fast renovation of this building, which is now a very stable contemporary art museum in Shanghai. And again, this thing of the accidents and the by production, where I happened to have a perfect recording of because I was spending so much time there. I was there at 2 a.m., I was there at 8 a.m., I was there at 7 p.m. So I could like basically see how this building was growing in front of my eyes. And this turned itself into another film that had nothing to do with the biennial, but now it's a documentary in a way, or it's a document, let's say. It's a document of the making of this building, which now is a museum, right? Like in 20 years, maybe it may be regarded as let's say, MoMA in New York.
It's a very big art set. And now, a last question is, so you've been traveling almost non-stop. You go into these different contexts. Sometimes it's the city, sometimes it's the countryside, and do these very, very big installations. But what has always been constant is the return to Rosario. And we saw many of the images, whilst
the brick farm, especially.
Of the brick farm, and I think it would be great to hear a little bit more about that, because you once described, the house of your parents as an existential bunker. You always return also to the house of your parents, and then you have this brick farm on the outskirts of Rosario. It would be great to hear a little bit how this laboratory works, how this collaborative situation works, and about this idea. We once did a talk at Art Basel together about the artist as a farmer, and you really assumed that role there to be a farmer.
Yeah, I think first of all, what I think we learned, or I learned a lot when I did that first project, and this is the first time we created this kind of parasitic workshops, experimental-ish workshops. Is to take first of all the opportunity to engage, communicate, spend time in a non-productive, supposedly non-productive way. So we spent time there, we spent time in Xochimilco in Mexico City. I ran through those images like crazy. And then the same way we did at the DMZ, with no pretensions of finalizing something. The output was not to meet the deadline for an next biennial, a next show. It was only about experiential time and an exchange. So, and one thing I couldn't mention, the brick farm in Rosario is located in a very, very diffuse area, and perhaps we haven't touched base on this, because we could address what happens with shanty towns, which also demonstrate a certain, shanty towns, we call them in Argentina Villa Miserias or zonas de emergencia, emergency zones. These areas are integrated in the fabric of the city, are also somehow integrated in some sort of rural zone, but they exist in some sort of ghostly space. So this brick farm is located in this area, in these neighboring areas. And the other thing I was interested in when I approached the brick farm is in this, let's say, sort of economical exchanges. I went there, and of course they don't assume they should deserve any attention, and I was there talking and trying to create or generate a space for us to work, and I rented their space. And it was quite touching, because no one was assuming that there was a need to be doing this thing in this place and in this type of collaboration. And we are still there, and we still happen to spend time. And one thing I really like also about these projects is I'm trying to generate a certain amount of protocols or history around them, so they can be what I call never-ending projects. So of course I won't be here forever, but there may be the possibility of keep on engaging with these areas for many, many years, hundreds of years perhaps. And this is the plan also for the DMZ. I'm trying to generate certain politics that will enable these projects to run besides myself, beyond myself.
And that's, of course, where there is a wonderful connection, even if it's so different from these earth art projects. We saw earlier today in Philippe's presentation, this, what Fernand Braudel calls la longue durée, the long durational aspect is kind of connected. And maybe that's a moment to open it up. Do we have questions for Adrian? Yeah, we've got a question here, and a question here, 2 questions.
Adrian, as
Yes.
a fellow Latin American, the South is our North. I'm from Venezuela.
Oh.
Yes. So I find your talk fascinating, because in a way I'd sum it up as the art of the accident, in a way. And between this balance between the timelessness of form, let's say the whale or something, and then the limits of the time of the process that it takes to do it, and the people you have to do it with, and the resources. I find there's an interesting balance that you reach between it, which is kind of your resistance, which is the resistance of consumption. You talked about colonialization and how we've been consumed, and the artwork consumes the products. And in a way, your biodegradation of your works over time into ruin.
Totally.
And so I was wondering, how much does that play a role for you, in that you want to kind of resist that consumption of the artwork into the media?
It's a huge part of my interests, and I think it's a very good way to put it. It's a fight, and it's full of contradictions. As any human being, as we were discussing, again, I find it. The reason we are here is incredibly, talking about countryside, it's already a huge contradiction, right? And I think these contradictions are meaningful. I think, of course, we do need somehow certain, I'm going to called the Hegel umbrella is going to appear. But we need binary systems. We are entities that very soon after we appear in this plane of existence, we learn that we didn't exist, which equals to we were dead, but we didn't exist. And then we have existence, we are alive, and then we die. And this is something we learn very soon, and I think this is one of the matrices of the matrix on how we organize concepts. What I'm trying to say is that I believe very strongly that we need to retrain ourselves and abandon binarism. It doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work perhaps anymore to say, do not smoke, or where to put your cigarette butt or not, or because if I check what I'm wearing, I'm getting some other types of problems. And yes, actually, it's wonderful that you're also mentioning the process, which was one of the 1,000 notes I couldn't read, which is like in my practice, in what I do, it's always in doing. This is important, the doing and the things. So that's why I tend to show, our making the supposedly final shot of the thing and its degradation, it's all part of the flux of things. And actually, very recently, I understood that it's all a project. I cannot talk about individual works. And this is also why I like to make them flow in this way. And one thing I talking about, like how to start to address more specifically these problems, is as I grow older and understand how complicated they are and how responsible we need to be. It's very rare that I come with notes so precise, but I felt this is a very delicate subject. We can easily say something wrong, mostly when you're not like, this is another interesting thing, right? Like, we are using this platform, English, my weird English Argentine accent, weird Swiss English accent, and weird, who knows how many English accents. We assume too easily that these are the platforms we should be using to communicate, right? Like, I had the luck to have parents. I come from a middle-class background, and when I was a child, public education, primary education, high school education, university, they were very good. I think they still are very good. So you can receive a proper education in Argentina for nothing. But to study English, for sure, they have to send you to some private institution. So your family has to pay for you to have this key to be able to say things in the world. You know what I mean? I don't know if I'm answering, but one last thing I want to say is that that's why I also wanted to bring all this information and the maps on where these projects are happening. Because as I see back to all the things I've done, I do feel it's more and more important to very precisely say this was done here at in Cuenca and not in, I don't know, Salvador. Yes, so I'm trying.
But it's fascinating, because it's the first time I see you also to show such maps.
Yes,
and cartographies in the many lectures I've seen. That has never been. So that's a premiere. You had one more question? I know we're out of time. I see the 3-minute sign a long time ago, but yeah.
Thank you for your lively speech. You used many political ideas or phrases during your speech, and I wonder to what extent you view yourself as a political artist carried by some sorts of an enlightenment, and that we have to overcome certain conditions in our society, or whether this is just the underpinning of your work.
I think I'm a person that personally doesn't believe that there's something as being a political artist and not being a political artist. I think there are different ways of stating certain preoccupations. And I think there are certain moments where you feel they are more, they're more accurate moments to reveal certain interests around these subjects. These last years, I have become more aware of certain logics that were embedded in my work that I needed to bring much more to the surface. I think I I am very responsible for many misreadings in my work. Because the spectacle, these huge installations, I mean, I think they obscure many of the other meanings, many of the other, not meanings, potential interpretations. And I, again, as growing older, and I'm not growing any younger, looking back, I am like, I need to be way more careful. I need to perhaps give more entry points to my work. I don't know if it answers the question, but
It's a great conclusion. More access entry. But Adrian, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. This is good.